Hi, today we're going to do a tutorial on running and maintaining your modern German-made grandfather clock. This is a pretty typical modern clock, and we want to talk about what you need to do after you've received the clock and either a watchmaker, clockmaker, or a technician has set it up for you. So I always recommend leaving this setup, the initial setup, to a qualified person, because there are some details that are not easily done unless you have experience doing the actual setup. So as far as your responsibility once it's set up and running in your house, several things that you have to be aware of. One is winding it and setting the time. So winding the clock is done at least once a week. At the very least, you'll notice that the weights get down near the bottom after a week has gone by. And winding it is a pretty simple procedure. You wind all three of the weights up using a crank until they come to the stop at the very top. So winding it is basically just a matter of gently and evenly winding the clock until it comes to a stop at the top. Do all three of them. Try to do it as evenly as you can. It's a little tricky because of the door. We just have enough clearance for this crank there. And get it wound right up to the top. Once the clock is fully wound, then every time you wind it, you have to reset the time on it. Resetting the time is just a matter of checking an accurate watch or a clock, and you can turn the hands backwards or forwards on a modern clock. We always recommend that you go forwards if at all possible, but of course if the clock has gained some time, then it's okay to turn it backwards. Resetting a time over a longer time period, if for example you're away for a couple of weeks and you know that you won't be home to wind the clock, then the first thing you want to do is stop the clock before you leave. And stopping the clock is just simply a matter of stopping the pendulum from swinging, just like that. To restart the clock, you must give it a fairly good swing to get it going again, to get it ticking evenly. What happens is with a larger swing than what it normally would run with, it actually causes the clock to put itself back into what's called beat, and that means that the clock will be ticking evenly once the pendulum settles down into a normal swing. Okay, so once the clock is restarted and you want to set it over a long period of time, let's say for example it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's the clock is showing 10:30 a.m. in this case. We're going to turn this little lever over here to the silent switch, to the silent spot, and then we can turn the hands forwards to the actual time. Now with this clock, as with any clock with a moon phase, you'll notice that the clock has an AM and a PM, and some clocks have nighttime shutoffs. This one doesn't have a nighttime shutoff, so it's important that you understand that you know whether you're in AM or PM when you're setting the clock. So in this case, the way that you would tell is when you go past when you go around the 12 hours, if the moon phase changes, then you know that you are in AM basically. And if it doesn't change, then you know you're in PM. So if you went around a full 12 hours at this point, you would be able to tell whether or not it's AM or PM. So once you've got the clock set on the time after you come back home and you set on the right time, then just move your lever back over to one of the chime locations. And you'll notice that usually the clock will start chiming right away. So that means that the clock will be out of sync now until the next full hour. When it comes up to the 3 o'clock at this point, it should resynchronize itself. If it hasn't resynchronized itself by 3, then wait until 4, and it'll definitely be resynchronized by 4 o'clock. So now that we've set the time, wound it, and made sure that it's on the right time and everything is working properly, we'll talk about switching the chimes from one to another. So on this particular clock, there's 3 different sets of chimes. Now you can change the chimes as often as you like. Usually what I recommend is try to give them some exercise by changing them maybe once a week or maybe once a month, whatever works best for you. So the way that you change the chimes is just simply by moving the little lever until it drops into the next little detent that you can feel as you go from one to another. It'll actually drop into a little spot, and you can feel it if you're very careful about how you do it. You can feel where that spot is. and you can just move it from one to another. Now, I caution you not to do that when the clock is chiming. Do never change the chimes when it's chiming, and never change the chimes when it's within 5 minutes of actual chiming. So at 25 past, at 10 past, any of those 5 minutes before the quarters, within that 5 minute window, do not change the chimes, because that would mean that the chimes would already be engaged at that time. So again, talking about setting a time on a modern clock, you can, as I say, if you put this on silent, you can go backwards or forwards, whichever is easier, and then just simply turn it back on, wait for an hour at least for it to resynchronize itself, and that'll be fine. The other thing that we need to talk about is the moon phase on these clocks, which is very common on most of the grandfather clocks now. So the moon phase basically is decorative more than accurate, but it can be fairly accurate if you reset it regularly. The moon, of course, goes through its phases every 29.5 days. And on a clock, of course, with the dial, the face that the moon is painted on, it only has 29 teeth. So that means it's going to be inaccurate over the course of maybe 4 or 5 months, which means you'll have to reset it. So resetting the moon phase, again, make sure you're on AM or PM. In this case, we want to be on PM if at all possible, which would mean that you're farthest away from when the moon phase actually changed. And then it's just a matter of clicking this until the full moon shows in the center. And then if you have a calendar or some sort of a device that'll show you what, in my case, I have an app on my phone that shows me when the last full moon is. It's a matter of counting off the number of days since the last full moon. So if we've had 17 days since the last full moon, it would be, you'd click it once for each day. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, just like that. And that should be pretty accurate. If you look outside at night and see the moon, it should be pretty close to the actual moon phase. But again, this does wander off over the course of several months, so you will have to reset it if you need to. As far as timekeeping is concerned on these clocks, the accuracy should be somewhere within about 5 to 7 minutes a week. That's quite normal parameters for any mechanical device. If it's outside of that parameter, then you should have a watchmaker or clockmaker have a look at it and see what's going on with it. We do recommend servicing every 4 or 5 years. That's because the oil will have dried out over that period of time. And with an investment like this, you don't want to run the risk of having the mechanism wear out in it, because the mechanisms are extremely expensive now. So it's much better to have them serviced regularly. Just as you would change the oil in your car, the clock has oil in it and it needs to be changed as well. When we do an oil change on a clock, it means a full disassembly of the mechanism and a full rebuild. And that's something that should be done every 5 years. And I think that pretty much covers everything, unless there's anything else. Of course, if you have any questions that I haven't covered on this, then please give us a call or email us. Our email is service@perfecttiming.ca, and our telephone is area code 705-325-1455.